much again. Welcome to Britlit Session 3. You have made it to your third week. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the privilege to be able to home educate and to learn at home and to learn with our friends. We pray that you would bless all of the families represented in our class, that they could have a good day today, that they could do well with their studies, and that this class would be interesting and worthy. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you're in the middle of Beowulf. What do you think of Beowulf? Do you like it? All right, last week you got a volunteer for a devotion for the Imitation of Christ. So it's time for that volunteer to read. Okay, back to class. I hope that you are enjoying Thomas à Kempis, and I hope that you are reading him more than just in class. It would be very appropriate for you to read Imitation of Christ for your own personal devotion during the entirety of the school year this year. Session 3, this is our schedule review, and we're continuing in Beowulf. You should be halfway through. You have study guide questions that you probably need answered. Hopefully you've looked through the complete study guide and read half of Beowulf or listened to half of Beowulf, excuse me. We'll talk again about that heroic worldview, the worldview that values honor above all. We will experience a Viking funeral from about the time of the Battle of Malden, that someone left a written account for us. And we'll touch on Lucrece, Dido, and Thisbe. We'll get into Caedmon's hymn, Christ is Risen, by Marty McCall, and listen to a modern artist sing one of Caedmon's hymns, unaccompanied, of course, just voice. And then we'll be looking at Sutton Hoo and the excavations. And we're going to look at some Saxon riddles. The Saxons loved riddles. This week, what is your assignment? You're going to finish Beowulf. Complete it. Complete listening, complete your study guide, your syllabus reading. These are the same pages listed earlier, 83 to 93. You don't have to listen to them again. Do look at your timetable on pages 400 to 411 and casually review the glossary if you have not done so far. Finish up your study guide. You should have half of it done. This study guide is 25% of this quarter's grade. So finish listening to me read Beowulf. And I also have read alouds of Chaucer's Legends of Good Women. And I have just three chapters, really two prologues and the chapter on Thisbe, the chapter on Dido, and the prologue, which is just awesome, the prologue. And so you've got those to listen to if you like to listen to me read them. But next week, bring every man with you. We move forward in time, really quick paced in this class, but we have to cover lots of Britlit during the school year. So bring every man with you next week. Just stick it in your backpack. Thank you. Next week, we jump into Middle English. Next week, we're out of Old English, believe it or not. We jump into Middle English. We'll be talking about the medieval church, talking about drama. You'll turn in Beowulf. We'll talk about the Norman conquest of 1066. We'll talk about teaching illiterate masses. How do you teach people about Jesus if they can't read? How do you do that? And we'll make fun of Beowulf reading our Grendel's dog reading. So if you can read dramatically, be sure and volunteer to read that. But it means you need to read it over and over and over again at home so that you can read it in a Beowulf dramatic manner, please. And next week, we're right into reading a play about the crucifixion. We are into Everyman, and we'll have lots of fun with that. That Everyman guide is also a 2-week project. And I read it aloud. All right, the Chaucer's Legends of Good Women. This is so much fun. It really isn't so much about good women as bad men. There are lots of bad men. And Chaucer kind of was taken to task for the representations that he made of women in much of his work. And so he tried to amend that by writing the Legends of Good Women, which I believe is a farce and quite a parody still. You can skip syllabus pages 83 to 93 if you want to listen to me read those 3 sound files instead. The prologue is the most important. It's 32 minutes. Dido. If you've taken classical lit, or if you take classical lit next year, then you'll know who Dido is, and you'll know Thisbe. Pyramus and Thisbe show up in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream as a farce at the end of that play. And Dido is a queen who fell in love with Aeneas, who was on his way to found Rome. He left the burning city of Troy and took his wife with him, lost his wife. Her ghost came to him and said, "Don't worry, you can find another wife in Rome." And he stopped by at Carthage on the way to Rome accidentally, and he meets Queen Dido of Carthage, and she thinks that they together will found a city there in Carthage, and he intends to leave when they're done having fun. And so Dido commits suicide. These are tragic. Thisbe and Dido both commit suicide. So they're very tragic, and he's talking about good women. But obviously, this is supposed to be funny. So enjoy that. The legends are also in the form of a dream vision, just like Caedmon's dream vision and Dream of the Rood. These are dream visions. The difference is that Chaucer is trying to be funny, not religious. And this is from the Ellesmere manuscript here on slide 7. And that's Harry Bailey, the host. The Ellesmere manuscript has quite a few, I think 21 perhaps, of the characters are drawn out or painted and on the Ellesmere manuscript, and it's pretty cool. So I will be showing you those little images throughout this presentation. Chaucer wrote legends of Cleopatra. He did one for Thisbe, Dido, Medea, Cleopatra, who committed suicide, Thisbe, who committed suicide, Dido, who committed suicide, Medea, who was a witch and tricked her husband, Jason and the Argonauts who went for the golden fleece, and then Medea seduced him, and Jason and Medea, they were fleeing, and she was a witch, and she cut up her little brothers and threw them overboard so that her dad would stop to get them so that he couldn't catch up and catch them. So she wasn't a very nice lady. Lucrece, awesome Roman lady who committed suicide. Ariadne, the one with the ball of yarn to help her lover get out of the Theseus and the Minotaur, to help Theseus get out of the Minotaur's den and not be eaten by the Minotaur. So these are really, if you don't have classical education, they can sound kind of crazy. If you listen to me doing the read aloud, I think they'll make quite a bit of sense. And if you do classical lit one of these years, then you'll be ready. The prologue is the best part. Okay, Eyewitness to History. This is really a fun book. I have one for world history and I have one for American history. If you homeschool, these are great resources. And so we're going to read one chapter from Eyewitness to History. And it's all about a Viking funeral. Let's see, I forgot to write down my time here so that I can keep track. It's all about a Viking funeral from Eyewitness to History. And this is AD 922. Remember, the Battle of Malden is right in that time period, 991. And so this is a Viking funeral for someone just like Britannulf and the guys in the Battle of Malden, performed by Scandinavian merchants on the Volga. And this was observed by an envoy from the Caliph of Baghdad. So Baghdad in Persia, and what we call Iran today, this guy observed this and he wrote about it. And that's how it comes down to us, which is pretty cool. Ahmed ibn Fadlan was a 10th century Arab Muslim, Arab Muslim, Arabic literature and traveler, I hope that makes sense, who wrote an account of his travels as a member of an embassy. He produced a description of a funeral by a Scandinavian, probably Swedish chieftain who was on an expedition on the Eastern Volga trade route. The account is a unique source on the ceremonies surrounding the Viking funeral of a chieftain or king. The dead chieftain was put into a temporary grave, which was covered for 10 days until they had sewn new clothes for him. Now, I don't even want to think about digging this guy up after 10 days. I suppose depending on the climate and the time of year, but this is pretty yucko. One of his thralls, slave women, volunteered to join him in the afterlife, and she was guarded day and night, being given a great amount of intoxicating drinks while she sang happily. Okay, so they have this volunteer lady high on alcohol and drugs. When the time had arrived for cremation, they pulled his long ship ashore and put it on a platform of wood, and they made a bed for the dead chieftain on the ship. Thereafter, an old woman, referred to as the Angel of Death, put cushions on the bed. She was responsible for the ritual. Then they disinterred the chieftain. That means they dug him up and gave him new clothes. I would not want to put new clothes on that guy. In his grave, he received intoxicating drinks, fruits, and a stringed instrument. The chieftain was put into his bed with all his weapons and grave offerings around him. Then they had 2 horses run themselves sweaty, cut them to pieces, and threw the meat into the ship. Finally, they sacrificed a hen and a cock. And you can see this burial picture that there is a horse on the right, buried with this Viking chief. Meanwhile, the thrall girl went from one tent to the other and had, and I have revised this, had intimate relations with the men. Every man told her, "Tell your master that I did this because of my love to him." While in the afternoon, they moved the thrall girl to something that looked like a door frame, where she was lifted on the palms of the men 3 times. Every time the girl told of what she saw. The first time she saw her, now remember, she's high and she's drunk. The first time she saw her mother and father. The second time she saw all her relatives. And the third time she saw her master in the afterworld. There it was green and beautiful, and together with him she saw men and young boys. She saw that her master beckoned for her. By using intoxicating drinks, they thought to put the thrall girl into an ecstatic trance that made her psychic, and through the symbolic action with the door frame, she would then see into the realm of the dead. Thereafter, the thrall girl was taken away to the ship. She removed her bracelets and gave them to the old woman. Remember the angel of death? Thereafter, she removed her finger rings and gave them to the old woman's daughters, who had guarded her. Then they took her aboard the ship, but they did not allow her to enter the tent where the dead chieftain lay. The girl received several vessels of intoxicating drinks, and she sang and bid her friends farewell. Then the girl was pulled into the tent, and the men started to beat on the shields, so her screams could not be heard. 6 men entered into the tent to have intimate relations with the girl, after which they put her onto her own master's bed. 2 men grabbed her hands and 2 men her wrists. And I skip a little bit here and tell you basically the angel of death put a rope around her neck, and while 2 men pulled the rope, the old woman stabbed the girl between her ribs with a knife. Thereafter, the relatives of the dead chieftain arrived with a burning torch and set the ship aflame. It is said that the fire facilitates the voyage to the realm of the dead, but unfortunately, the account does not tell to which realm the deceased was to go. And that is the end of our AD 922 account. And that is why we go and tell other peoples about Jesus. In India, in the country of India, there are still some remote areas where wives are sacrificed with their husbands when the husbands die, and the wives are burned alive with their husbands. It's supposed to be illegal, but it is still done. This is AD 2022, and it is still done. But anyway, that's pretty cool recounting. And sometimes the ships were pushed off to sea on fire, and sometimes they were buried under the ground. It really depended on the group of people that they were dealing with. Now, Beowulf. Beowulf is really fun. This is in your syllabus on page 60. And if you have someone to read this aloud, then you can pause the video here. Otherwise, I'm going to read it aloud and you can skip it later or listen to me after your friend reads it. But this is making fun. It's a parody of the exploits of Grendel's dog. And so we have Beowulf who went off to get Grendel. Well, here is Beowulf off to get Grendel's dog, brood kit of X-meow. Oh, I have to look at page 60 here. God, I had it as a slide. As you go to page 60 in your syllabus for Brave Beowulf, which really is pretty cool. Brave Beowulf, brood kit of X-meow, hearth pet of Hrothgar, in whose high halls he mauled without mercy many fat mice. A night did not find napping nor snack feasting the wary war cat, whiskered paw wielder, bearer of the burnished neck belt, gold braided collar band, feller of fleas, fatal too to ticks. The works of the wondersmiths, woven with witches' charms, sat on the throne seat, his ears like sword points, upraised, sharp tipped, listening for peril sounds. When he heard from the moor hill howls of the hell hound, gruesome hunter grunts of Grendel's great Dane. Deadly doom mutt, dread demon dog, then boasted Beowcat, noble battle kitten, bane of barrow bunnies, bold seeker of nest booty, if hand of man unclasped the heavy hall door, meow. If hand of man, let's see, the heavy hall door, and freed me to frolic forth to fight the fant-bearing fiend, I would lay the whelping low with lethal cloth blows. Fur would fly, and the foe would taste death food. But resounding snooze noise, stem slumber thunder, noise music of men snoring, mead hammered into the wine hall, fills me with sorrow feeling, for fate does not see fit to send some fingered folk to lift the firm fastened latch, that I might go grapple with the grim ghoul pooch. Thus spoke the mouse shredder, hunter of hall pests, short-haired rodent slayer, greatest of the pussy geeks. Okay, that is so great. I found that on the internet, but I don't have a name for it. Probably some sleepless grad student who had to study Beowulf just a little bit too long. But you have to admit that that is done really, really well. Old English poetry. Prior to the 12th century, so the 1100s, AD, it has been calculated that we have about 30,000 lines of Old English poetry. Old English poetry uses a system of alliteration and stress. Normally, there are to be 4 stressed syllables in the line, or 2 in each of the half couplets, and at least 3 of these syllables should be alliterated, beginning with the same consonant or any vowel. What is alliteration? It's in your syllabus, page 1. It's also in the glossary. Alliteration where the fur, fly, fast, flipping, something like that. Lots of repetition of sounds. Practically all of the Old English religious poetry we possess has been attributed to one or the other of these 2 poets. Caedmon, who you are a little bit familiar with, this says flourished around 670. That means we believe that he wrote his best works around 670. We, of course, would not know the date, the year of his birth or of death. And Cynewulf flourished just a little bit later. Caedmon was a steward in a monastery. Workers entertained one another during meals by singing lyrics to a harp. They sang of battles like Malden, mythic heroes like Beowulf, and riddles. Caedmon sang songs that were given to him in a dream vision, amazing the monks and scholars. His hymn of creation is in your syllabus, page 1. Cynewulf, all of his poetry, there's a 3-part volume that I have: the Advent, the Ascension, and the Last Judgment. These are 3 large poems. They're easy to find on the internet. God, the all-ruler, is fate metamorphosed. And so they don't no longer believe in fate. Now they believe in providence. It's kind of morphed from fate to providence. That was pretty easy for pagans to think, okay, it's not just fate, it's God. You just give fate a face. The powers of evil are identical with those once called giants and elves. The paradise and hell of the Christian are as realistic as the Valhalla and the Niflheim of the heathen ancestor. So they had a good place and a bad place to go after you died anyway. But word becomes providence, and that's important to know. Topics include the heroes of the Old and New Testaments, the saints as they live in the legends of the church. The metrical form, with rare exception, is the alliterative line constructed on the same principles as in Beowulf. where the line is divided into 4 beats, half on each side, possibly for use for a drum. But weird has definitely become the spirit of Providence, and you need to remember that. This is Beowulf, lines 3076 to 3086. If you go to Beowulf, grab your copy of Beowulf and go to line 3076. This is going to be near the end, 3076 in my copy, which is Rebsenum, but might be a different edition and have different page numbers. But lines 3076. He's a good wine lord. He needs words of praise, love from his people when he leaves this earth, when breath is born from his body at last. So the Geats went grieving, gathered by the mound, and this, of course, is a burial mound. Hearth companions praised their lost one, named him the ablest of all world kings, mildest of men, and most compassionate, a most lithe to his people, most loving of praise. And the idea is that a world is passing away. That's down to the end of the lines. It's all over. Beautiful, really, but I cannot pronounce it. Christ and his apostles are described in these poems like English kings or chiefs, followed as in feudal duty bound by hosts of clansmen. The homage paid to the divine son is the allegiance due to the son of an Anglian king. So they pay homage to Christ like they would pay homage to their liege lord. And this is probably a good transition for this syncretism that is taking place as they're switching over from a pagan to a Christian worldview. It's very similar, comparable to that paid by Beowulf to his liege lord Hygelac, or to that displayed by Britneth at the Battle of Malden. And so Christ becomes your liege lord who you serve and would die for him. And you can kind of see that their stories can be transitioned over into Christian stories, or mostly Christian stories. We're still talking about syncretism, which means you're still a heretic. The Christianity of England in the 7th and 8th centuries, so the 600s and the 700s, was a commingling of two different kinds, Celtic and theological. So there's proper theological Christianity, and there's Celtic Christianity, which adds their own little flavor. We're used to dating the introduction of Christianity into England from the mission of St. Augustine in AD 597. Now remember, that's not the original St. Augustine, who was dying in AD 410 as the city of Rome burned. This is St. Augustine, named after him, who's the guy who sent the 40 monks in. And you need to know that. St. Augustine in AD 597 sent in the 40 monks. So don't forget, Western missionaries had been to Britain long before St. Augustine and his 40 monks. The original disciples had disciples, and they all took off, and some of them did go to England. That's where the Sword and the Stone and the Knights in the Round Table and the Holy Grail, that's where all of those legends come from. The existing form and practice of Christianity in Beowulf is a blend of these, Celtic and theological. The most important of the religious poems at one time attributed to Caedmon are Genesis, Exodus, and Daniel. He made those into poems. From the point of view of the historian of literature, Genesis is the most interesting of these. It's a poetical paraphrase of the first of the canonical books in the Old Testament, extending to the story of the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. So remember when Abraham is willing to sacrifice Isaac, but an angel stops him from doing so in Genesis 22. So Caedmon has a poem that apparently he was able to sing that goes through all of Genesis 1 through 22. If only we had recordings. The poem opens with the praise of the Creator. The poet then proceeds to relate the revolt and the fall of the angels, which, according to ancient theology, necessitated the creation of man to fill the vacant place in heaven. Many of the early church fathers thought that because some of the angels left heaven, that God created man to fill in that void that place so they would eventually come to heaven. That would not really be theologically correct. You have to remember that some of the early church fathers didn't have access to everything that we have. None of them had access to what we have. We have access to everything that anybody wrote that has survived for the last 2,000 years. And then the creation of the earth in accordance with the opening chapters of the Vulgate Bible. The Vulgate Bible is Jerome's Latin translation from the Hebrew, and he completed this living in Bethlehem. And Jerome's translation was the translation used by the Catholic Church for 1,000 years until the time of the Reformers. This is amazing. He locked himself up. He went to Bethlehem. He met Jews. He learned Hebrew. He learned Hebrew very well. Then he locked himself up and he translated the Bible from Hebrew into Latin 1,000 years before any reformers thought of translating the Bible. Jerome, an amazing person, and I'm pretty sure he's in your glossary. Caedmon and Cynewulf are in your glossary also. At this point, we have a repetition of the first motif. The fall of the angels. Satan, in anger at having fallen from his high estate, avenges himself on God by tempting man. And the rest of the narrative proceeds in accordance with the biblical narrative. The monastery at Whitby, forever famous as the home of Caedmon, was ruled by the Abbess Hilda in accordance with Celtic, not Roman usage. The influence of Celtic Christianity may be traced in some of the features that most characteristically distinguish Christian from non-Christian poetry. The Celtic monastery was the home of a brotherhood of priests, and the abbot was the father of a family as well as its ecclesiastical superior. The Christian virtues were humility and meekness, and they produced a simple form of Christianity readily understood by the unlettered people of the north. And of course, the monasteries were the Vikings, just because they were Christian monasteries. The Vikings plundered these places over and over again. It's the personal relation of the soul to God, the Father, the humanity of Christ, the brotherhood of man, the fellowship of the saints, that the Celtic missionaries seem to have preached to their converts. This simple doctrine inspired the best passages of Old English religious poetry. Any attempt to describe Old English literature, as shown by the work of Caedmon and Cynewulf, is difficult. Caedmon stands for a group of singers whose work we feel to be earlier in tone and feeling, though not always in age than that which we know to be Cynewulf's or can be fairly attributed to him. Some things are not sign and can't necessarily be attributed to Cynewulf, and he is close to 100 years later. The work of Cynewulf and his school marks an advance upon the writings of the school of Caedmon. Caedmon is at times subjective and personal in tone, but Cynewulf, the personal note is emphasized and becomes lyrical. Caedmon's hymn, I was going to mention to you, the Ruthwell Cross has been enclosed by a building now so that people can look at it, photograph it, but it can't deteriorate any further. Caedmon's hymn in praise of the Creator is a sublime statement of facts, calling for universal praise of God. Cynewulf's confessions in The Dream of the Rood, or with The Dream of the Rood, which is the dream of the cross, that was in your syllabus reading this week or the week before, and his vision on the day of judgment in Christ are lyrical outbursts. And he really is pretty good. If you want to know a little bit more about runes, you can look him up in your glossary. I see that it has an old glossary page number, and that would not be the correct page number. Apologies. Okay, now we're going to listen to Caedmon's call. I'm going to have to pause our audio because I forgot to bring. We'll pause the audio and I'll be right. Okay, I have my speaker all ready, and I hope you can hear the sound well enough. This is 3 minutes and 3.5 minutes, and you should have a handout by now of this music, and I have the words on the next screen. And of course, if you want to listen to this in person, I think a song is about $1.20 now, and you can download it and have it.
is meet that we worship the warden of heaven, the might of the maker, his purpose of mine, the glory Father's work, when all of his wonders, eternal God, made a beginning. He early established for earth's children heaven for rule, the holy shaper, then mankind's warden, created the world, eternal monarch, making for men land to live on, Almighty Lord. Christ is risen, alleluia, alleluia. Christ is risen, alleluia, alleluia. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, hallelujah.
Well, what did you think of that? Did you enjoy that? I enjoyed it. If you want to hear some real monastery singing by real monks, you can always take a field trip and go out to Silverton, Oregon. And there is a monastery there. And the monks walk up and down doing the Stations of the Cross, wearing their big brown robes. And if you go at the right time, you can go and hear them sing. You can look them up online and see what they have for the public. But it is beautiful to hear voices without even any music. And again, that artist, there we go. That artist is Marty McCall. And this is just a CD back in the old days when we used to buy CDs. And this is Caedmon's tombstone. To the glory of God and in memory of Caedmon, the father of English sacred song, fell asleep hard by, and that would be AD 680. And that's the Caedmon on the right is Marty McCall CD album cover. And then these are the words, which I believe you got today as a handout. It's just half a page, but it's pretty cool. Okay, I told you the Saxons also liked riddles. They really liked riddles. I have an entire book. I bought this fun book, Anglo-Saxon Riddles by John Porter. And I typed up 3 of those for you. And I'm going to make you sit for a little bit and see if you can solve the riddles before I give you the answers. I thought they were quite hard, but I have had kids actually figure these out before. So this is a riddle. I tell a riddle and you tell me, what is it? What is this? Who is a hero so bold and brainy as to say who spurs me on my road when I rear up, strong, wrathful sometimes, throbbing with thunder, thrust into exile? I ride the world's range, rifling houses, burning homes. Smoke rises gray over roofs. Earth groans with men's dying shrieks as I shatter fruitful woods and forests, fell standing trees. Roofed with rain by regal powers, sent wandering, widely scattered. On my back I wear the garments which once held human flesh as well as water. Say who swathes me, or what I who carry that weight am called. Can you guess what this is? I'm going to give you about 4 seconds. Any guesses? All right. This is a storm. This is a description of a storm. All right. The next riddle. Busy and idle, fettered by rings, I must gladly obey my master, break my bed, stridently blazon his gift to me, a neck chain. My weary sleep, man or woman, often broke in greeting. These enemies I answer winter cold, warm limbs sometimes burst bound fetter. Yet he is pleasing to my master, none too wise a man, to me too, who has some skill, and in words may triumphantly tell my tale. Okay, what is it? It's a bell. I would never have got that. Don't feel bad. All right, our third and our last riddle. I am an exile, iron wounded, blade battered, battle sated, sword weary. War I see often, fight foes. I fear no comfort or help comes for me in cruel strife before I'm wrecked among warriors. But hammered blades hack me, hard-edged, hate-sharp handwork of smiths strikes me in strongholds. I must stay for a crueler clash. No cure was ever found by folks in their fields, which could heal my wounds with herbs, but day and night through deadly blows, the sword's wounds widen my flesh. What is it? Yes, it's a shield. Hopefully you got that one. All right, let's talk about those Sutton Hoo excavations. This is just before World War II. And of course, this is over in Britain. And if you've ever been to Britain, if you've ever been to London, we spent a week in London one time. And London, as they take you out to see somewhere like the Sutton Hoo excavation, or if they take you out to the big stone pillars, I can't think of the name, that may be a clock as they take you out there. We have beautiful pictures of it. You see these mounds anyway, all over the London countryside. They're just great big burial mounds. And people know it's not a natural hill. They know that it's a burial mound. And it's crazy because they're all over. And you think, how come they haven't dug all of these up? Well, there aren't that many archaeologists. And so many of these have already been robbed of all of the good stuff that it's not worth an excavation. I know it's hard for us because here in America, we really don't have anything to excavate. We don't understand the idea of something that is 1,400 years old or has been buried for 1,400 years, and that somebody will not go dig it up. This picture on the left there is probably Mrs. Something Pretty, Mrs. Pretty, and then her excavator, who later became friends. They've even made a movie of the Sutton Hoo excavation because she got people to start excavating. She just had a feeling there was something there. Excuse me. If you don't know yet, I always have problems with my voice. One of the reasons to make permanent recordings for you while I still have a voice. So this is not a ship that you're looking at on this slide. This is actually the impression left by the ship so that it can be photographed, because it can't be lifted out because it was made of wood and the wood is all gone. This is the impression left by the wood, which is pretty cool. Where is Sutton Hoo? In your syllabus, page 8, and on page 55, you have another map. It's in East Anglia, and that gives us a guess as to which king was buried in this burial, because there's no way to find out today. So you just have to go by the area and then the time period of the burial. And you can see over here on the lower right of this map, it says Sutton Hoo. Hoo is a word that means a spur of a land, and it's kind of on that spur, that rounded spur that looks like a head of cauliflower over there to the right above Canterbury, and just northeast of London, which is pretty cool. Edith Pretty considered herself a spiritualist. I've read about her, and they call her a spiritualist. I think today we would call her New Age, but she's a spiritualist, and she was a landowner, and she had dreamed of ghosts, and she had just felt something important was buried on her land. And they had all these bumps, all these burials, and not every one of those is going to be, a Stonehenge or something. That's the word I was looking for earlier. On the way out to Stonehenge, you see these bumps all over the place, and they're just there. They're burials, but who knows whether it was anyone really important or not. But she had a feeling there was something really cool buried on her land. That's what a burial mound looks like. It's not much. It's very obvious that it's handmade. Shortly before World War II, archaeologists uncovered this remarkable find in East Anglia. It's an apparently early 7th century, that means early 600s, grave monument made for an Anglo-Saxon king. And that's how we know it's probably King Redwald of East Anglia, that would be circa about AD 625. The monument was in the form of an 89-foot ship, 89 or 90-foot ship. The Sutton Hoo burial ship was uncovered by archaeologists during the summers of 1938 and 1939. This local landowner, Mrs. Pretty, had noted 18 low mounds. Can you imagine? She has 18 low mounds on her property. After several empty burials, one yielded an untouched burial. It's very much like in the 1920s when excavators went over to Egypt and excavated under the pyramids and found nothing because grave robbers had already stole everything, until I think King Tutankhamun, I believe his was found in 1922, and his was untouched and amazing. Well, that's what this is like. There was little more than the iron rivets left of the actual ship, because it was wooden, which was originally 89, 90 feet long and 14 feet wide at its widest point. This is a huge ship. It's more than a boat, it's a ship. When you're talking about something 14 by 89 or 90 feet, it's bigger than most of our houses if you put everything all in a row. Buried deep beneath the mound, and I'm using the British Museum as my expert here, buried deep beneath the mound lay the ghost of a 30-meter-long oak ship. At its center was a ruined burial chamber the size of a small room. In it lay weapons, armor, gold coins, gold and garnet fittings. Garnets are red, silver vessels and silver-mounted drinking horns and cups and clothes piled in heaps, ranging from fine linen overshirts to shaggy wooden cloaks and caps trimmed with fur. The burial also contained a leather purse. This is the clasp of that purse. The white parts have been replaced. That would have been made of leather, in which were placed 37 gold Merovingian coins or tremisses, three coin-sized blanks and 2 billets. So they must have wanted him to have more than 40 somehow, but you have gold coins here. No trace of a body was found. However, analysis of samples for residual phosphate, which is left behind even when a body has completely decayed, taken in 1967, do support the idea that a body was originally placed there, but had totally decayed. So they do think there was a body here. The coins in the purse were struck between 85.75 and 86.20. suggesting that if the burial took place not long after 620, the body belonged to one of 4 East Anglian kings, either Ridwald, Earpwad, or co-regents Sigbert and Eric. Of these, opinion is divided between Ridwald, a convert to Christianity who abandoned his faith, and Sigbert, a devout Christian. Quite interesting, really. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing these kings' names because it's Old English. The objects in the burial were carefully chosen to reflect the king's high rank and to equip him for the afterlife. Many of them, even to the modern eye, are extraordinary, and they allow us a glimpse into life that was barbaric, yet sumptuous and sophisticated, a lifestyle that is described in the poem Beowulf, which, although written down a couple of centuries after the burial, vividly brings to life this earlier heroic period. And remember what heroic means, based on honor, this honor culture. Marks left in the earth allowed archaeologists to determine the ship's dimensions. Jewelry, coins, silver plates, weapons, armor, utensils, drinking horns, etc. were among the objects collected at the site. Because no bones were found, archaeologists have identified the monument as a cenotaph or a memorial. And this would be what the British Museum said, but that would be pre-1967, because now they do believe a body had been there. Scholars have long pointed to the parallels between Sutton Hoo and the descriptions of funerary practices in the Old English poem Beowulf. Did you bring your copy of Beowulf? If you brought it, this is in my copy, this is on page 100, which is very near the end of the story. At the end of the story, line 3137, if you can find it. They raised skyward, ready for their king, a pyre, a funeral pyre to burn people on, a pyre on that point for their proud war leader, hung it with helmets, hard shield bosses, bright mesh corselets, as he bade them do. They laid in the middle their beloved gift friend. That's the person who's dead, their gift friend, the person who gives them rings, lifted with heart grief the helm of their land. On the cliff they kindled a king's balefire, wavering death flames, wood smoke mounted rose up darkly over roaring pitch flames, wailing to the sky. It's beautiful, really. Here again is that purse cover. It was the buckle for a leather purse. Now you have to remember that the parts that are red, these are made of, I said it's not ruby, it's not cardamom, red semi-precious stones, the name of which I said once in this video, but this is why I'm making the videos, so I don't have to remember all of these things. Garnets. These are garnets, which are we call them semi-precious stones. And of course, this is solid gold. This is a shoulder clasp. Think of something that you have seen perhaps out of Lord of the Rings. And so this is a shoulder clasp that holds his cape or his coat together. And you can see the pieces on the back, which are for sewing, so that you can somehow attach this to your cape or your coat. And this is called cloisonné. We still see cloisonné art today, where you have pieces of garnets and other semi-precious stones that are set in by very fine work of gold, which holds them in. Beautifully intricate. Sutton Hoo, this is an artist's rendition of what perhaps the ship looked like as they were preparing their king for burial. And they're putting everything inside. This is from the British Museum. And again, you saw this helmet, and I told you that all of the smooth parts are not actually present on the helmet. That's the part that they had to replace. Archaeologists are very picky. They don't want to make something and let it be impossible to tell which is original and which has been recreated. So the recreated part is always, for example, in buildings, if they are marble buildings, the pieces they replace will be bright white and too perfect, obviously too perfect to be part of the original. But sometimes when making a building like the Parthenon in Athens in Greece, to recreate the building, they don't have all the pieces. And so they make up the missing pieces with obvious new pieces. And that is what they've done with this helmet. And of course, they've put it back together based on information from other helmets. I believe there are 4 Saxon helmets now that were found in, where were they found? I had a note. Of course, the Sutton Hoo helmet. I thought I had a note here to tell me. That's okay. I'll come across it. This is the British Museum, the year that we went. I think it was 2007 or 2009. I get it mixed up. And actually, that's my husband and I in the lower front corner. We had somebody take this photo of us, and it's quite dark, but that's us in the lower right-hand corner. And this is the Beowulf helmet. Of course, you can't touch it. You're looking at it through a display case. It is pretty cool, though, because you can tell the pieces that are gold, which is amazing. And you can tell that they liked mustaches and they had really hairy eyebrows. A close-up of the helmet, and you can see little garnets set in as the eyes of these creatures that are carved onto the helmet. And this is a replica. You can get replicas everywhere, but this is kind of sort of pretty much based on what it would have looked like. Preparing a burial mound, this again is an artist's rendition. You have to dig up all of that soil to get this ship to fit into the burial place, and then you put all that dirt back on, and you have a great big mound, and it is a miracle that they were not all looted. The boar crest, if you'll pick up your copy of Beowulf again and go to Beowulf lines 303, that's early on in the story, 303. In my copy, it's on page 11, the Rebsamen translation. And we read about the boar crest, line 303. Around their masked helmets, golden boar heads beamed to the sun, flashed a war gleam on fire-hardened steel, signaled their weddings. And then they stride together across the seawall. So these are helmets with either images or figures of boars on them, just as the one that you're looking at right now. And this is where the guard takes them to Herot and asks a blessing on them. It's when they first arrive at shore, and they march forward after they get the guard's speech. So helmets with boars are found at numerous digs. They've got chainmail face and neck guards. So attached to that helmet for your neck and face, they also would have chainmail so that you can't have your neck slashed. And these have been found at Sutton Hoo, Woolstrom, and at York. I knew I had that detail written somewhere. It's actually in the margin of my copy of Beowulf. And so here's, it probably looked something like this. This is a shield mount. This is a fantastical creature. You can see it has a head and kind of an open beak with sharp teeth over there on the right. And it's I think it's a winged dragon with the wings close fitting closed right now around the body. The grandness of the items demonstrated the status of the individual. While this is considered a pagan form of burial, it's interesting to note that some of the items found at the site also had Christian associations. And so here in this burial at Sutton Hoo, we have pagan stuff and Christian stuff. And that's how we know that even as far back as AD 625, there was this odd syncretism of Christianity and pagan, and even in the decorations. So this is a shield mount. It's just a decorative piece that would go on your shield mount. Here you can see the fantastical creature on the right with his curled beak and his very fierce claws. I believe part of the decoration is missing. I've never seen a Sutton Hoo piece that was smooth like this, so I think some pieces have come off, but we see lots and lots of garnets in the pieces on the right. These are parts of a belt. In the center bottom, the picture on the left, in the center bottom is a belt buckle, and it has a very intricate layer of buckles underneath. It can't just come undone accidentally. And these are links in the belt that are surrounded, that have been carefully cleaned up, and again, done in this cloisonné type style of jewelry art with lots and lots of garnets. Absolutely beautiful. This is a close-up of the buckle. So look at the buckle, center bottom here, And then this is a close-up of the buckle. To get pictures, I often go to those photo share websites and grab their pictures, or news sites. Very often, if you see a news article and it has a photo like this in it, you can look up on Flickr and look up the photographer's name from the news article, because the photographer, the news article might have used 3 of his pictures, but he may have taken 20, and then he shares them on Flickr. This, just the buckle, is 400 grams of gold. That would be about $25,000 this year. I just looked it up today. There are 13 creatures on this buckle surface. Most of them are snakes, intertwining snakes, writhing snakes, intertwining 4-legged beasts, 2 fierce birds on the right. If you can tell that those are birds at the very tip of this buckle on the right. So it's pretty cool. A lot of times the Celtic art will have snakes swallowing snakes, and then fantastical creatures and dragons with wings and things like that. This is a detail of that belt buckle. You didn't realize it was that detailed, did you? These are garnets. This is the filigree. This is how tiny the pieces are. There's the belt buckle. There's the close-up. Isn't that amazing? This is a shoulder clasp. Think of something right out of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. This is a shoulder clasp. He had lots and lots of things to inspire him. Of course, you know he was an Old English, Middle English specialist, and so he knew Beowulf inside and out, wrote at least one incredible book, Beowulf and the Critics, as far as making a case for Beowulf as we study Beowulf. So we see lots of garnets there and lots and lots. It's just incredible that that was buried for 1,400 years. Here's a shoulder clasp that is open, and then it has a pin to hold it closed. And again, you can see these fantastical creatures, very often snakes eating themselves or kind of biting themselves. It's that Celtic swirl, but these are all animals. Coins and earrings, the 40 coins, and they can, of course, date these coins, and that helps to date the burial mound. And earrings. And this is a burial chamber replica. I think this is from a university, but I did not cite it. Apologies for that. The body was decked in jewelry, and other items were placed close at hand. Then the trench was filled and a mound was built over the ship. This idea of a burial mound is similar to what we see at the end of Beowulf. This is a crosshead carved with an interlace ending below in a bird's head. So you've got this head that you can tell that's a bird's mouth that's opened, and a crisscross pattern, which is pretty cool. And here you have the 2 pieces that you saw close-ups of. This is a shield, and of course the plain cream color part is the part of the shield that they have had to make a replica of, which is mostly the shield, because I suppose the shield could not have been made of gold, or it would have been too heavy to lift. So this is called a parade shield, something you wore not in battle, but to show off or to hang in the hall. It's a reconstruction on the front. This is in the British Museum. The iron boss, that large bump in the middle is a boss, is decorated with gilt bronze foils and then a central garnet-filled disc. And it's flanked by protective emblems. So you've got the winged dragon on the left with his wings closed, and then you have a bird of prey on the right, the one with the really sharp claws. And this is what it looks like in the case. Very difficult to get pictures without people around. And this is just gold jewelry worn across the chest, very similar to what football and basketball and sport players who make way too much money wear great big gold chains around their neck. This is no different than that. And the jewelry, of course, is exquisite. You can see other rings and earrings and necklaces with all the very similar designs. This is a slider, all dolled up in garnets and gold, absolutely beautiful. The sources that I used for this, just my husband's photos, and then all of the other pictures that I was able to get. Now you're supposed to get out your study guide right now, And we're going to be looking at your study guide and see if you have some questions on this. Your teacher is, or your parent is ready to help you with these questions, and I'm ready to help you right now. You have, let's see, did you read the introduction to your study guide? Yes, 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 right? You read the introduction. You know that it might be Northumbrian. Never skip the words in your study guide, because those words are careful study that I made over years and years and years. There's even that cool quote from my friend Dr. Jan Haluska, who's gone to be with the Lord. Number 1, define Anglo-Saxon. Any word that is bolded in your study guide means it is in the glossary. And so you can never go wrong quoting the glossary. If you Google what is an Anglo-Saxon, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pages. And so to have your Anglo-Saxon definition applied to this class, you need to use the glossary. Number 2, what is a scop? Anybody remember that from last week? Raise your hand if you remember what a scop is. Yeah? Yes, yes, a poet and who often is singing his poetry. Number 3, define lay and give an example from the text, and you'll be able to look up lay in the glossary, and it even gives you an example, which is awesome. Don't give a minimalist answer. A lay is a short poem. Please don't answer a 3-point question with 3 words. Please look it up in the glossary. This is how you learn, is by retyping it out as an answer here for number 3. Define wergild. And you hopefully remember, we even talked about this a little bit last week. And so this is really similar to what we do today, where we make settlements based on the person's worth. Number 5, define comitatus. And again, that is in the glossary, which explains everything to you. Define weird. We've talked about it. Don't just go from memory. Look it up in the glossary. Number 7, define thane and give an example. Who's an example in our story, Beowulf? Yes, it's Beowulf himself. He is a thane, but do look it up. Number 8, define and give an example of a kenning from Rebsamen's translation. And you can look up kenning in the glossary. And I'm not sure if there are samples of kennings. Your teacher has samples of kennings if you really are struggling to find those. And she may be able to give you either line numbers or page numbers or something if you really need help. Number 9, what's the approximate date of the single extant, the single surviving Beowulf manuscript? And you can look that up in the glossary. How many of you, did anybody, talking about that single manuscript, did anybody look up Sir Robert Cotton? We talked about him a little bit last week. Sir Robert Cotton, the guy that had the massive library, he is in your glossary. And you can look up and find that he was best known for his journaling, which he started at age 17. Are you 17? And his collection of manuscripts, which he began at the age of 25, collecting manuscripts at the age of 25. His library later became one of the foundation deposits of what we now call the British Library. And it goes on to tell about the Lindisfarne Gospels, Sir Gawain, which we'll be reading, Beowulf, and the Magna. He had 2 original copies of the Magna Carta. One got burned up and one was saved. It's really fascinating. That's just one nice paragraph in your glossary. The glossary is worth your time to look up. So find out what the approximate date of that manuscript is from the glossary. Number 10, when and where do the events of the story take place? And this information, I tell you, it's in your syllabus on page 39. If you're really worried about it, ask your parent or teacher to help you along. If your grades 7, 8, 9, you might need a little bit of help. If you're 10, 11, 12, you can probably find this on yourself, by yourself. If you can't, we'll see what your teacher or parent says. Number 11, list and define at least 5 literary features utilized in Old English epic. Now remember, epic is in the glossary. We look up epic and we remember all these things that are about epic. What do? They they vaunt, they boast, they use caesura, that pause in the middle of the line. They use litotes, the understatement, that was a good king, or the Rudolph, that nose was not unshiny, things like that. Epithets, the use of epithets, Thelma the elderly, that type of thing, an epithet. So pick some epic conventions that apply to Beowulf, please. Then number 12, what were the burial rites for the Danish king Skilled? And I even give you the Beowulf lines, so you can look at those lines and retell in your own words. Number 13, who built the Great Hall and what did he name it? Of course, they name it kind of after themselves. You can look that up. It's in Beowulf lines, I think 67 through 77 tells who built it and what it is named. Then the alien creature, Grendel, the monster. What kind of creature? Number 14 is Grendel. Who is he descended? Where does he now live? And I give you the line numbers. And I would like some quotes from you. Quotes that I have, that of course I have line numbers for. He's an alien creature in dark exile. That was line 86. He's an infernal hall guest. That's line 101. He's an evil, cunning man killer. Line 111. He's a hell fiend. That was line 159. And if you use these, please quote those. You can't quote it if you don't have a line number. Quote it, cite it properly with a line number so we know you found it. You didn't just look it up on the internet, that it is in your edition, that in that line number. He lives in darkness. He prowls the marshes, the moors. He's really icky. Number 15, there's no mention. There is mention of no plans for payment. What does that mean? Who are the parties of this feud? One creature killed another creature and has no intention on paying the war guild, the cost for a man's worth. And who would that be? Well, who's doing all the killing? Grendel. Grendel's killing everybody. And who is the man whose thanes are disappearing one after the other? Right, that's Hrothgar. So Grendel and Hrothgar have been feuding, and the text does tell us how long they've been feuding. It's been going on, and I gave you those line numbers so you can look them up on your own using the line numbers in your study guide. Number 16, how is the heroic concept of weregild demonstrated here in lines 155 to 158? Okay, this is easier than it seems. Excuse me. The weregild is if you kill someone, you have to pay the weregild. You have to pay, it's like a ransom money, so that you will not, so they won't come to get you. You have to pay money or they're going to come get you or one of your people. And so how is the concept of weregild demonstrated here? Well, the sum of money is to be paid so that there won't be revenge. But is Grendel going to pay the weregild? No. Why? Because Grendel's a monster. Grendel is outside of society, descended from Cain. He's coming straight up out of hell, out of the dark place. He does not pay weregild. And that tells us as a reader or as a listener, if we were listening to the Scop sing us or tell us this story, we realize he's uncivilized. He does not play by the rules. So how is weregild demonstrated here? It's demonstrated that the monster, Grendel, is not going to pay the weregild. But what is the weregild? Oh, guess what? It's in your glossary and you can define it that way. Number 17, retell the events of lines 175 to 186A in your own words. This is the moral of the story. And where you're retelling the words, this is where you are writing dialogue. So if you would like to, you can use contractions, but follow the dialogue format that we talked about in session 1 and session 2. And so redoing this in your own word, they're praying, right? They're praying, but they're praying to pagan gods and goddesses, probably gods. They're praying to pagan gods, and they're promising if they'll help him now that they'll honor them. But why? The Beowulf author says that they ignored God because they were heathen. So they didn't know any better. It's not their fault that they didn't know any better. And they are ashamed because they're terrorized They feel hopeless and they're ashamed of that, because honorable people in honor society should not feel ashamed. They should be out and just go get their enemy. They're praying to names. The Beowulf author tells us they're praying to names that will never help them because they're helpless. They're praying to pagan gods that don't exist. It's kind of like when Isaiah says, when God says through Isaiah, my people look for advice from a wooden stick. That's what's happening here. Number 18, how did Hygelac Thane hear of Grendel's death, and who is this brave Thane? So who's Hygelac? Going to figure that out. All right. If you look at the study note right above number 18, it says, line 194, meanwhile, in Geatland, which is now southern Sweden, we call it, Hygelac Thane Beowulf. So who is Hygelac Thane? Beowulf. That's why you have to read it right the first time, because the next sentence might just say Hygelac Thane, and you're thinking, what? Who's Hygelac? Well, it's Hygelac Thane is Beowulf, and he hears about the terror and decides to do something about it. I'm reading right from your study guide in between number 17 and 18. God will help him because he will give God credit for his victory. So when Beowulf goes across the water to go and help Hrothgar, he knows God will go with him and he'll help him. And that's how he will testify to them of Christ, because their pagan gods have not helped them at all. And Beowulf's God will help them. And he will say, my God, the Lord of heaven, the maker of heaven, he can help you win. So it's very much a syncretism of Christianity and pagan stuff. Okay, let's see. How did Hygelac Thane, this is number 18, how did they hear of Grendel's deeds? And who is this brave Thane? Read the note above if you don't know his name yet. So how did Hygelac Thane, number 18, hear about Grendel's deeds? Yeah, from the Scop. The Scop, the poet, came and sang about what was going on across the water. And Beowulf says, yes, I'll go. I can go do that. Number 19, please rewrite the dialogue in lines 247 to 251 in a proper dialogue format. And so if you look up in the glossary dialogue format, you will see the dialogue format and you won't do it wrong. Look it up in the glossary and then rewrite that. It's actually pretty cool the way he does it. It's like, I've never seen anybody who looks as awesome as the guy you're with, you know, that kind of thing. You got a lot of weapons there. I don't believe you're lazy bones. You look awesome. Boy, I sure hope you can fight like what you look like, because you look like you can fight. Something like that. Okay, and so then the guard takes them to Harrow, to the long hall, think of Lord of the Rings, and then Beowulf gives a big speech there. And if you're listening to the Thelma read aloud, I will tell you exactly what's happening and that Beowulf is giving a big speech now. Number 20, what does Beowulf tell the guard they've come to do? And you know that. Number 21, what renowned ability in battle does Beowulf possess? And it's in lines 379 to 381. And it's actually pretty cool, and he's famous for this. Then number 22, contain Beowulf's boast to Hrothgar. What does Beowulf say he'll do, and how will he do it? And you're going to tell me Beowulf is going to do this. That's what he says, and that's what he's going to do. And number 29, rewrite Hrothgar's good wishes to Beowulf. Use dialogue format, look up dialogue format in your glossary, and you'll be doing it right. And basically, you know, if you can kill this monster, we'll give you everything we have. You'll be our hero. And number 24, using 3 to 5 sentences, describe the events in these lines, 720 to 819. That's 100, almost 100 lines. And of course, that's to make sure you understand what happens. Basically, Grendel comes in and he's thrilled that there's still guys coming to the hall every night instead of hiding out somewhere. And he just, you know, grabs one and eats them up. And then he gets to Beowulf, and Beowulf uses his superpower and all that. So I think you can do this with 3-4 sentences, but please be thorough. Write more than less so that your teacher, parent, and I know that you understood what you just read. It's the big deal. Number 25, what does Scylding Queen Withtheow request of her husband in the presence of all? And basically she says, well, give him everything, honey, but don't give him, you know, the throne. You've got a son we want to put on the throne. But you read this text and put this in your own words. What's the name of the sword Beowulf carries into battle against Grendel's mother? That's worthless. Number 27, describe the sword Beowulf uses to kill Grendel's mother. And this is where if I could just hand you a candy bar through time and space, I would if you got this answer right. There are so many cool quotes here that describe that sword. Number 7, to describe this sword, wow, use quotes and give line numbers. It's a great hoard weapon smith wrought by giants. It's a broad wonder blade. It's wasted and quivered, withered in that blood. It wavered and dripped. It's cool descriptions, but you need to use them with quotes and give all the line numbers, please, for everything you describe. Number 28, who does Beowulf credit for his victory over Grendel's mother? Because that's a plot spoiler. He goes back and kills the mother too. And what did Caedmon's Call sing about? The great shaper of heaven. And that's who Beowulf gives credit to, the great shaper, God, for his victory. Number 29, what woke the sleeping dragon? This is kind of the end story, the wind up of what happens to Beowulf as he gets older. And what woke the sleeping dragon? Sad part of the story. And number 30, let's see. Number 30, what New Testament narrative may be the source? If you can't figure it out, talk about that in class. And number 31, if the end of the story is an allegory of the crucifixion of Christ, who is Wiglaf? And this is where if your teacher or parent wants to help you a little bit now for number 30 and 31, that's okay by me. It can be difficult, especially if you're not familiar with your New Testament. You need to take New Testament survey once I get that class made. So anyway, those are the 31 questions, and I've kind of given a whole bunch of them to you, but you still have to quote them properly, cite them properly, and you still have to do it yourself. Make sure you understand what you're reading this week. And if you've still got some class time today, you can use those to discuss any of the questions that I did not explain well enough. Okay, Lord bless you. I'll see you next week.